Good evening. We are going to start with a round of applause for ourselves because we are here and we are healthy and it's great, all right? And I think and we can do jazz hands hello, so that's that. Good evening. I'm Jennifer Rabb and have the extraordinary privilege of serving as the president of the incredible institution, Hunter College, where the American dream still comes true. It is my pleasure on behalf of the Jonathan Fenton Director of Roosevelt House, our dear colleague Harold Holzer, and the entire Hunter family to welcome you to Roosevelt House for the 2020 Phyllis Kossoff Lecture featuring our special guest and extraordinary journalist, Gail Collins. Now, Phyllis, we're going to come back to you, but I think we just have to start with our round of applause for one incredible woman. Talking about no stopping us, Gail. This is your next chapter. It is, of course, a great pleasure to welcome Gail to this house, Gail Collins to this house, because in many ways, she is an inheritor of the Roosevelt House public-spirited legacy. In particular, Eleanor Roosevelt, whose daily newspaper column, much like Gail's, was and continues to be a great intellectual and cultural resource. This house, which has been a part of Hunter College since 1943 and is now nationally recognized as a public policy institute, was, of course, Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt's New York home for 25 years until they moved into the White House. It is where Eleanor began her magnificent career fighting for the rights of women, children, working people, and minorities. This is where FDR recuperated from polio, and this house served as his campaign headquarters when he ran for governor of New York and for president. It was in the rooms of this house that many of the programs that became the New Deal were first discussed, most notably in an upstairs library where FDR asked Frances Perkins to become the first woman to serve in a presidential cabinet. She agreed only after he promised to support her proposal for an old age insurance program. That program, of course, is known today as Social Security, a program which would not go unappreciated by the women over 50 who make up the subject of Gail's new book, which we are here tonight to celebrate. We know Gail has a deep appreciation for Frances Perkins as well as Eleanor Roosevelt because both are written about admirably and extensively in Gail's book, No Stopping Us Now, The Adventures of Older Women in American History, along with dozens and dozens of other luminaries who helped change and define the history of older women in America. Women we'll hear about tonight, like Sojourner Truth, Betty Ford, Ida Mae Fuller, Ella Baker, Jane Fonda, Hillary Clinton, Mother Jones, Susan B. Anthony, and so many more. In her column for the New York Times, Gail once quoted Eleanor Roosevelt as saying, quote, "Men have to be reminded that women exist." A comment Eleanor made to reporters when the all-male list of top Kennedy administration appointees was released. This comment could have served as well as the original motto of Hunter College when it was founded 150 years ago as the 9th college in the country to accept women into higher education. But Thomas Hunter did not have to be reminded that women exist because he was a crusader who believed in access and opportunity for education for all women. More recently, Gail said about Eleanor that she had, quote, the greatest middle age of any woman in American history by far, because of all that she was able to accomplish in those years as an established global leader for human and women's rights. The new book is in many ways a follow-up to Gail's best-selling When Everything Changed, The Amazing Journey of American Women from 1960 to the Present, and American Women, 40 Years of Dolls, Drudges, Helpmates, and Heroines. With these books, and with the new one, Gail Collins has established herself as the country's preeminent voice on the history of American women, both the progress and the pain, where we stand and where we stood. All of it told with the sly wit we have come to know so well from her columns in the New York Times. Gail Collins joined the New York Times in 1995 as a member of the editorial board, and a few years later became the first woman ever to attain the post of New York Times editorial page editor. Previously, she had worked as a columnist at New York Newsday, and before that, at the New York Daily News. Over the years, her voice has become an intrinsic part of the fabric of this city, how we live in it. For many of us, it is that voice to which we look for both comfort and a clue on how to understand what would have happened that week in our world. Gail gives us permission to laugh even when we groan. She keeps us in stitches even as she keeps us up to speed. It is a pleasure for all of us at Hunter College to welcome this extraordinary writer, intellect, historian, journalist, and friend of Hunter College, Gail Collins. Gail will be in conversation tonight with her New York Times colleague, Jessica Bennett. Jessica is an acclaimed journalist in her own right and a best-selling author of The Feminist Fight Club, a great title, an office survival manual for a sexist workplace. In 2017, she was appointed the New York Times' first gender editor as part of an initiative to expand coverage of women and gender issues. And she currently works at the New York Times as an editor-at-large and writer focused on gender and culture. And I hope that this is the beginning of your relationship to Hunter College, because certainly what you write about is so germane to our students. Making Hunter an even more appropriate place to host this discussion of Gail's new book is the fact that we are home to the renowned Brookdale Center for Healthy Aging, which for 40 years has been a national leader in promoting the health and well-being of older Americans. And I want to give a shout out and ask you to stand our Rose Dobroff Executive Director, Ruth Finkelstein, who has done so much to make 90 the new 80, 80, 100 the new 90. In the 19th century, Hunter College became the 9th institution in the country to admit women. We remained an all-women's school until after World War II, when we opened our Bronx campus to returning male veterans, and in 1964, our downtown campus to men. But we have continued to be a place of female empowerment. We are the place to have one of the only schools in the world to have 2 women Nobel Prize winners in medicine. Thomas Hunter's devotion to educating all women, and he said this in 1870, that we should accept, quote, the Negro who will sit next to the Jew, who will sit next to the Gentile, has put us in this extraordinary record of having African-American alums such as Ruby Dee, Pauli Murray, and Audre Lorde. And of course, we're the home of great empowered women leaders, such as the wonderful Bella Abzug, our extraordinary congresswoman and one of our great alums. Tonight's lecture series is sponsored by another extraordinary alum, our own Phyllis Kossoff. Phyllis is one of these great female leaders who emerged from Hunter College. Phyllis studied at Hunter at a time when women were not encouraged to have careers and often not even encouraged to attend college. But Phyllis, as they say, persisted. She became a great leader in her family business, Burton Packaging, and she wasn't, though, just a business leader. Phyllis went on to be a great nonprofit leader, founding the core group that would go on to become the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation that supports millions of people living with CF and their families. And Phyllis, just for that alone and your extraordinary family that are here, we're just going to really want to give you, and have you please stand. A little queen, how about a queen's wave? There you go. Phyllis Kossoff and the many women that I mentioned are a reason that we created an old saying, you can always tell a Hunter girl, but you can't tell her much. Phyllis' support for Roosevelt House began in 2006 when she was among the first to embrace our goal of becoming a national hub for thought leaders in public policy and conversation among some of our most significant public intellectuals and writers. Phyllis backed up that dream by endowing this lecture series that bears her name, and we are so grateful. In the years since then, the Kossoff Lectures have brought a long list of outstanding public figures to Roosevelt House, including Supreme Court Justices Sandra Day O'Connor and Stephen Breyer, former Congresswoman Barney Frank, David Boies and Ted Olson, the lawyers who made the compelling arguments that helped persuade the Supreme Court to overturn gay marriage bans, the First Lady of the City of New York, Chirlane McCray, and last year Nobel Prize-winning economist Paul Krugman. All of us at Hunter are enormously proud of Phyllis Kossoff for her achievements as an educator, businesswoman, and especially philanthropist. And we are deeply grateful for her unfaltering generosity to Hunter. So once again, Phyllis, thank you so much for making tonight possible, for the reception that you will invite us to all after, and truly exemplifying to the students our Hunter motto, Mihi Cura Futuri. the care of the future is mine. So before I bring up Gail and Jessica, I want to ask the four Kossoff scholars who are here tonight, Jarina, Shakila, Devenish, and Annabella Gregg. I think a number of you, the students, are here. So please stand. This is the future that Hunter has made possible. And in so many ways, Phyllis not only supports these extraordinary talent, meets with them, and urges them on to invest in their education and move on to make a difference. Without further ado, Gail, Jessica, it is just a great honor to have you here. We look forward to your discussion. Welcome to Hunter College.
Germ-free, but also very hip.
These guys are working, we're good?
Gail, I'm so happy to be here with you.
I'm so happy to be here. And thank you, Phyllis, very much for having us.
So let's dive right in. The subtitle of the book is Adventures of Older Women in America. What is old?
It's always a good question, and it really depended so much on when you were living in this country. I first got the thought about the book when I was reading letters from the early colonists back to England. And they were all guys, and their only thing was they wanted women to come, please, to become their wives. And they sent their qualifications, and their stipulations were that the women must be civil and under 50 years of age. And that was it. That's all they cared about. And then I was reading much later a thing from the 70s. You remember, you wouldn't remember, but you're not getting older, you're getting better, the hair coloring stuff. I was reading the context, the copy that went with the cut line there, and it said, these days, a woman who's 25 and older is old. And I thought, wow, you've gone from 50 is young to 25 is old, and then now we've got Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Nancy Pelosi bounding around, and what changes all these things? That's why I wrote the book, really.
And we are, of course, living in a political moment in which two near 80-year-olds are competing for the Democratic nomination, and our president is 73. I want to ask you about our president in a moment, but first, is that a problem?
Well, it sort of, I got to say that everybody is now so focused on the whole woman thing in this, that with these two guys, one of the things you really want to know about is who the vice president is going to be, and hoping that that will be a woman, and who knows what, but onward and upward.
Do you think that a woman in her late 70s could be in their position now, or would we be talking about it more than we are with these men?
Well, the interesting thing about this crew as they were going around, and debating early on and campaigning is that nobody really talked about Elizabeth Warren's age. And Elizabeth Warren is 70, but nobody said she's really old or is she too old. It was always, Bernie and Joe Biden, and who are older, but still they're all in their 70s. But I thought that was sort of a moment of some kind. I don't know if it's a tribute to how old Biden and Sanders look, or tribute to Elizabeth Warren, or to the way our minds have progressed over the years, but it's very interesting.
So maybe that's a little bit of progress?
Maybe that's a little bit of progress. We'll see who the vice president is going to be. Stuff could happen. Stuff happens. I'm very optimistic, I have to say, about women, where we are, where we're going. It's just, I've lived through that entire thing. When I was young, you weren't allowed to take physics in high school because girls didn't take stuff like that, and everybody got married right away. And at Barnard, if you were engaged at the graduation ceremony, they put an orchid on you. If you were not engaged, you got a lemon. I swear to you, this is true.
Really?
Yes, honest to God. So
what was the lemon supposed to represent?
Loser, 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 loser.
Wait, and which brings me to, somebody called you a loser this week.
Yeah, the president on TV called me a stone-cold loser. And it was so weird because suddenly my phone is ringing and everybody is calling to congratulate me. And I guess that's the way it was when you got to be on the Nixon enemies list. It was just, oh, this is okay. This is very good. So my whole family was running around telling each other about it. And so here we are.
But you and Trump kind of go way back. Is that right?
Well, that's what he said when he was calling me a stone cold loser. He said, I've known her for a long time. She's just a woman. And, but that's him. But the first time I had an interaction with him was when I was at New York Newsday. And this was back in the 80s, and he was bankrupt or semi-bankrupt at the time. It was not going well for him at all. And he was before the city council trying to make a deal with the city to do something that he wouldn't have to pay anything to do. And so I wrote a column making fun of him. And I called him America's most famous thousandaire. And he was not amused. He sent me a copy of the column with my picture circled, and it said, "You are a dog with the face of a pig. No wonder you are angry. I would be too." And he misspelled "too." So I was going to throw it out. I thought this crazy real estate guy, my husband said, "Oh, God, this is so weird. You've got to save that." And the other day, a collector offered me $10,000 for it. But my family wants to keep it as an heirloom, so it's not going anywhere.
So the way that we perceive older women over time has really changed. At times they were more respected, at times they were more diminished. Could you talk a bit about how that has changed over the years?
It's lots of stuff happens, but I've always felt that the most important thing changing what women, how they were regarded, is basically economic. If you look at, say, the colonial women were almost always farm housewives. And they are raising vegetables, raising chickens, making butter, making cheese, trading with their friends. And I mean, the economy of the family was very dependent on these women. They were big earners, and they were very popular. And young women would like to come and hang out with them so they could learn all about this stuff too. And this great diary of this woman named Esther Lewis, I think, in Pennsylvania, at about 1800. And she's got a list of all the things she's been doing. And that year she had made 1,000 candles and 500 pounds of butter. And she found iron ore outside, and she opened a mine. She was sheltering runaway slaves. She was educating 4 daughters. And then her mother, who was 70-something, moved in with them and spun 33,000 yards of yarn in the first year. So these are people who are very, very popular. But when people moved into the cities, if you're a middle-class woman in the cities, you're married and you're a mother, but you have no other role whatsoever. You have no economic role. You do not bring in a penny. And at that point, the idea of when you got old became much different. You got old as soon as your children were grown because you had nothing else to do. You had no other role. And then you look at other periods in history, like World War II. The men are all gone off to war. The younger women who had children did not really want to go to work. They were very intense on staying home. So suddenly you have all these jobs opening, and older women are the most wonderful people in the entire universe. And I always knew about Rosie the Riveter, but I found a magazine article about Josephine, the 80-year-old riveter. And she was wonderful. Look at those planes she's riveting away at. And there was another magazine article that said, how wonderful it is to go into a restaurant and see 60 and 70-year-old women carrying their tray of plates with a bright gleam in their blue eyes. And I thought, I don't know how they felt about it, but that was that sense right then that older women were very, very, very valuable because they were bringing stuff in. And it sort of went back and forth like that throughout our history.
And what about now? How do we treat them now?
Well, mostly it's pretty good. There are certainly many complaints. I mean, I talk to women all the time. There's tons and tons of complaints. But if you look out at the world now, you look at Nancy Pelosi, you look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the sense that a woman is not useful or part of society is just not the same anymore. I mean, it's not, because most women do not grow up to be wives and mothers and nothing else. They have other roles, and as they get older, if they have enough money not to work, they do incredible things in their communities that the communities could not get along without. So unless you're talking about the entertainment industry, which is a very sad story indeed, but except for that, I think things are going pretty well.
So I recently started coloring my gray. I'm sorry to admit that here.
That is absolutely fine.
but
You know,
I was
I quote one of the Nora Ephron, my friend Nora Ephron
Yes.
said, you know, when you get, you know, that the reason that women are not looking older now is not because of exercise or better living through healthy eating or anything else or feminism. It's all about hair dye. And that, I think that's sort of, you know, there's a point there, don't you think? I mean,
absolutely. But I was so
looks really
fascinated.
nice, by the way.
Thank you. I was fascinated to learn that gray was actually once a status symbol in a way for women, but not kind of the way that you might think. It was more proof that they had followed the rules and could then be doing something other than thinking about their appearance.
It's one of my very favorite stories. This is an Elizabeth Cady Stanton story. You know, she was part of a large group of women in the North before the Civil War who really wanted to fight for abolition in a big way. But you weren't allowed to make a speech in public if you were a woman because they thought you were a harlot. They would throw stones at you. You were exhibiting your body to the public. This is terrible. And both black and white women in the North complained that they just were not getting any opportunities. Nobody would let them talk when they felt so violently about this issue. And then Elizabeth Cady Stanton came along and suddenly said, this is so true. Women were made to raise children, and that's their job. And have you seen all of mine? I've got a ton of them here, and they're all grown now. I have done my duty, and look at my hair. It's so gray. I am so old that, of course, you won't mind if I just go popping along a little bit here and there because of my gray hair, very old. And she was everywhere. She was running around on trains playing cards with soldiers in the middle of the night. She was, you know, going up the Alps. She was doing everything you can amazingly do, and then giving these talks about the woman and the home, and abolition, and the right to vote, and divorce reform, and a few other things thrown in there. But when other women saw what she was getting away with, they were so impressed, they started writing odes to menopause. It was like, you know. So it worked out.
What did the odes say?
You know, I don't know. I just, I'll have to look one up for you.
So at what point did women start dyeing their hair then? Because I was also interested to learn that actually men began dyeing their hair first. I could talk about hair dyeing forever. It's so fascinating. But at what point did that change? Did this sort of quest for youth begin?
Well, women tried dyeing their hair a lot over the different centuries. The problem was it looked terrible. It wasn't so much, theoretically it was a moral thing. Everybody talked about the moral part of it, but it was really that it just didn't work. And your hair fell out or it looked strange colors. And men tried doing it too, and the same thing happened, although I think they were maybe more oblivious for a while that they can't get away with this sort of thing. But then within the last 50 years, suddenly these new hair colorings came in, stuff you could do at home if you wanted to. You didn't even have to go out. And that was the beginning of the total change. And suddenly, nobody had to be gray if they didn't want to be anymore. It was just your choice. It wasn't a destiny at all.
You mentioned Elizabeth Cady Stanton sort of reaching her prime in many ways in her older age. And there are others you talk about in the book as well. Catherine Beecher, who enrolled in college in her 70s. Frances Willard, who learned how to ride a bike at 53. What was it about their age that allowed these women to thrive then?
It was sort of a period, for one thing. You suddenly had a period in which women were working on suffrage, on other public issues, and suddenly they were public personas, and they figured out other ways to get away with things. You know, Frances Willard wrote a whole book on how she learned to ride a bicycle, and she just did it because she wanted to do it, you know, but she turned it into an entire book. So different people figured out different ways to do things, and it worked out for a lot of them.
And they were able to because they had finished rearing their children?
Yeah, that was very important. You really couldn't get away with much of anything if your kids were still young. It was very difficult. But if you didn't have children, like Susan B. Anthony, you could do anything you wanted to, but people tended to regard you as a sad figure who, you know, had failed in life and stuff like that. I'm sorry, it was true.
Well, that was so interesting, too, to read about how she was perceived that way early on, but then as she got even older, she started to become this kind of hero figure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you know, and she, at the end, I mean, my God, when she had her, I think it was her 80th birthday, her last celebration, when she yelled at the president for not supporting suffrage. But she was just amazing. She would get up on pool tables and give speeches. I mean, she could not be stopped. And as she got older and older, people found her more and more and more heroic. And, you know, she died, you know, one of the great, you know, heroes in the history of feminism.
What do you think shifted in terms of the perception of her? Was it that she was older and less threatening?
Well, the getting older worked really well for her, too, because when she was younger, people perceived her as a spinster, a loser spinster who, you know, couldn't find a man, even though she clearly had no desire to find a man. But then as she got older, she was sort of more in the category of everybody else who was a widow or somehow or another wandering around, so it wasn't as big a deal. But papers made fun of the way she looked all the time, you know, that she was very thin, you know, and sort of scrawny, and they were very mean to her, but she didn't care at all. That was the trick.
Our paper was very mean to her.
Our paper has some bad moments, I have to tell you, along the way.
So, of course, we spoke earlier about Eleanor Roosevelt. We were in a hall named for her. And you talk about how she really gained her stride in her 50s. And so there's this wonderful quote from her that you put in the book about the advantage of age is that you take things more calmly, she says. And she says, you know that this too shall pass. There's sort of a modern, less nice way of saying that I hear referred to, which is that the more you age, the less fucks you give. Excuse my language. But I'm curious,
I'm sure Eleanor would have loved that.
Yeah, I'm sure Eleanor would love it. Do you see that? Do you feel that in your own life? Do we see it in politics? Do we see it throughout history?
Nothing is always true throughout history, and nothing is always true even now, but I think it is certainly true now that I run into trillions of women, older women, who have moved their own lives forward in different ways and are incredibly happy and incredibly fulfilled like Eleanor was, who are incredibly adventurous like she was. I couldn't believe they taught her how to use a pistol because she wouldn't take Secret Service with her when she went driving around the world. So, you know, talk about a middle-aged lady. There she is in her car with her pistol driving to Appalachia or someplace else, you know, and her husband had no idea where she was most of the time, but she was just one of a kind. But there are many, many, many other women like that along that line now, and you just see them every day. And it's just a matter of, are you happy with the life you're living? It's not any different from younger women who, you know, sometimes are and sometimes aren't.
Have you noticed that in your own life? Do you feel more fearless as you age? You've maybe always been a bit fearless.
I don't know. It's, you know, different ages have different adventures, and I can't think of any period that I didn't enjoy the adventure, whatever it was. But right now, you know, I've got an incredible job. I have wonderful friends. I have a fantastic husband. Everything's working out pretty well, and I've got Donald Trump, which may not work for any of you, but for us, he's really a blessing. Jesus Christ Almighty.
So there's this famous Gloria Steinem quote. It was her 40th birthday, and a journalist complimented her on how good she looked for her age, and she retorted, "This is what 40 looks like." But even Gloria admitted later in life to having Botox. So when it comes to, you know, beauty and this sort of quest for youth, will we ever get off of that treadmill? Will I ever just decide to go gray?
Possibly not the gray, but I mean, the thing about gray is it's no trouble one way or the other, really. If you're coloring your hair, it's no big deal. But the interesting thing to me about plastic surgery is that you have sort of these two strains, and I think it's perfectly normal and reasonable that older women who can get sort of light treatments for Botox and stuff that they feel makes them look nice, and or they color their hair, that's perfectly reasonable. People do that at every age. Try to look as cool as they can at that age. But when it becomes scary and weird is when you suddenly see people having many, 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 many plastic surgeries, one after the other, and there's a real look of desperation, you know, sort of besides very strange eyes and, you know, stuff. And you can tell some on the Academy Awards and stuff, every once in a while somebody will come up and you say, oh, wow, good Lord. She's way older. Wow, oh my heavens. But But and some guys do it too. But that's like everything else. It's moderation, moderation.
So your book covers 389 years of history. As I was reading, the journalist in me was like, oh my God, how did she research this? So I want to know a little bit about your research process, but also if there was one thing as a student of history in many ways that really surprised you throughout the research.
The way I did it, this is my third women's history book, so I have a lot of stuff, and it was kind of all piling up. And I basically just went back to the books I'd read and looked for all the women over 50 who were in them and just saw what they were up to. And then I had a team of researchers who were both fact-checking. I became completely paranoid about the fact-checking part. And that's why there's all those notes. It's like, I had a ton of notes back there because I was so paranoid that somebody would say, aha, you didn't know that. So, but it was a pleasure. And I don't know that I'll do another one like that, but it was a lot of fun.
And was there anything that really surprised you?
That really
as someone
surprised
who has
me.
written so much on this?
No, there were just things that stood out to me again that I hadn't thought about in particularly one way. When I was looking at the civil rights movement, for instance, which of course we all knew about and were conscious of, but when you look back, not only at Rosa Parks, who was in her 40s when she refused to move to the back of the bus, but then the great Montgomery bus boycott that comes right after that, which really woke up the North to the whole civil rights issue. And it was called for by ministers, but the people who did the work, who made that happen, were the middle-aged women in those communities in Montgomery who had been all their lives going around and taking care of neighbors and working with each other on projects in the neighborhood and doing all. So they knew everybody, and they knew exactly how to go and talk to women, to talk to people who were willing to walk to their jobs as domestics rather than take a bus. And it was all about them. And nobody really thinks of it that way. They always think in terms of Martin Luther King, but it was these middle-aged women out there who were the heroines of the whole thing.
What do you think younger women can learn from older women and the older women in history that you document?
Well, I think in part that it's something to look forward to, that we've gotten, I do think we've sort of gotten past the point. I mean, everybody has a moment when they turn 30, when they're thinking, oh my God, this is the end of the world. But, you hit a couple of other little bumps along the way like that, but I don't think of people as any longer being as obsessed with the whole idea, oh my God, this is the end, because it's not the end, it's never the end. You can look out there and see all of these women who are doing, look at Phyllis, my heavens. I mean, people who are doing things all into their, whatever age they are, throughout their lives, and they're heroines. And they have a wonderful time. And that makes people feel better about it all,
Maybe, would you describe that as a word that I asked you how to pronounce earlier? Gerontomatriarchy? Am I saying it right?
I think so. I'm not real great at it, but there was a terror at certain points in history when people noticed, especially as we got along, people noticed that actually older women controlled most of the money. Suddenly people started talking about, oh my God, gerontomatriarchy, government by old women, rule by old women, oh my God, what's going to happen next? And, it all went out. Everything was fine.
Well, and so there was the research report from 1955 that you write about in the book that truly warned that the country could be taken over by a gerontomatriarchy. But it's interesting because I look around and, I see Nancy Pelosi seshing in her red coach, driving Donald Trump mad, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg doing her morning planks that I wish that I could do. And I see J-Lo and Shakira, who, whatever you thought of their outfits, they are 50 and they were performing at the Super Bowl halftime show. And statistically, there are more women over 50 than at any other point in history. So are we actually living in a gerontomatriarchy right now? And is it actually just kind of awesome?
Works for me. I don't know. But the fact that everybody is getting along so well, I think, and there's one other thing we talk about getting older and older, is that besides the opportunities that women have as they get older to continue to work and be in the community and make decisions and change things. There's also a hell of an obligation. If you look at the number of people who are going to be 90 in the next 10, 20, 30 years, and most of them are going to be women, and we better be doing stuff, because otherwise, I mean, people are going to wonder what they're up to here, you know. So I think it's important for everybody to think in terms of opportunities and obligations. Guys, too, by the way. I always feel bad when I'm doing this. There are always these wonderful guys in the audience, and I'm thinking, my God, they're sitting here for hours, and I'm just talking about women. But that's the great thing about men, is that as women have evolved, men have become great partners to this new generation of women of all ages.
We want to make sure we have time for questions, because I know that there are probably a lot. And there are microphones around. So start thinking of your questions, and I think we'll do a little pass of the mics here.
Ask one more question while the mics go.
Perfect. Who was your favorite character to write about? There were so many that I loved reading about.
You know, not necessarily my favorite, but the one that I never thought I would be interested in at all, who I really got to be attached to, was Martha Washington. Who, I mean, really, I never, Martha Washington, but you look at her story, and she was married young, she had 2 children, her husband, who was wealthy, died. She ran the business. She ran his business and did very, very well at it. Then she met George. They got married, George took over everything and used the money to fix out Mount Vernon, and he was moving up in the world. And people in those days, if you were important or wealthy, as people would come by and they would just drop in and stay because there weren't any hotels. And Martha was entertaining 300 people a year. Some of them would stay for months. They would never go away. And she's running around getting all this organized and making sure they're taken care of. And then in the evening, after dinner, she is stuck entertaining them all in the living room because George sneaks off to his study so he won't have to be bothered. So she is stuck with all of his friends in the living room. And one of them, a senator, I think, wrote back and said, I had the best time. I had never thought I would have a good time having a conversation with an old woman. But it was actually very pleasant. And at the time, I think Martha was like 62 and he was 58. But still. And anyhow, and then the war came, and she was a huge supporter of the troops. She was at Valley Forge. After the war, when George became president, as we've seen, he wasn't that great at social activities, so she took care of all of that stuff for him. She was an unending support and an unending partner in the entire saga of his life. But they didn't have any children together, which George liked to sort of hint might have been Martha's fault, which everybody knew. Martha had 2 children sitting there, really. But anyway, they had no children together. And when people started doing the celebrations of George Washington, the woman they celebrated was George Washington's mother. And he didn't like his mother. She was a very unpleasant woman, but I thought that was such a good just analysis of that period of history when you were if you're only valued as a mother, first of all, you're going to be retired when you're very, very young. And secondly, you miss all this stuff and these amazing women. So she was one of my favorite sagas, I would say.
Perfect.
And now we have microphones.
I was also interested to learn that spinster was not always a bad word.
Goddamn, no.
Thank you very much. I'm half persuaded by your thesis that we are living in something of a golden age for older women. And then I hear phrases like, you drive like an old lady. Now, we would never say you do something and then fill in any ethnic group or any other identity group and use it as a slur. So would you sign off on that report card? On the one hand, all the salutary things you mentioned, and on the other hand, the lingering perceptions that to be an old lady is a bad thing.
Yeah, and I have to apologize, as I always do. I mean, I get overly optimistic and cheerful, and I glue over a lot of things. There are, a lot of bad things out there, but throughout modern history, it's been so funny. Driving like an old lady is an old canard, but you also read across these things in the paper about, and the magazines from the 30s and 40s about 85-year-old woman drives across America by herself, and all these strange celebrations of women doing things that really, driving and running lighthouses and doing all these other old lady things. So yeah, and sometimes it's also you drive like an old person or something like that. There tends to be, I don't think men are completely off the hook when it comes to discrimination on the basis of age. And I gotta tell you that the one thing that does drive me sort of nuts is a lot of the stuff you see on TV, things that I think are I still like to watch Saturday Night Live, but they are such agists on those shows. It's absolutely stupendous. I mean, the anti-age kind of stuff that is just totally undiscriminating, just all over the place, is bothersome. And if I ever get a chance, I'll tell them that.
I'll stand. Hi, I just wanted to ask, when like the first woman president is elected, do you think she will be a young woman or an old woman?
It'll work anyway, either way it is. And I think she'll probably be the same age as men. I think she'll probably be younger than Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, but virtually everybody is. Maybe she'll be Elizabeth Warren's age. She'll be 70. I don't know, but and I believe it'll happen. Possibly, starting with the vice presidency. I'll bet you whoever. It's probably going to be Joe Biden. Whoever he picks, I'll bet you it's a woman. And Joe Biden is like 77. I mean, so. Who knows? But it's going to happen. And when everybody was so very depressed when Hillary didn't win, and a lot of people I know thought it was because she was a woman or an older woman. I've always thought that the real problem at that moment was that people just sort of wanted a change. And that Hillary, for all of her amazing accomplishments, really was the opposite of a change. I mean, she has been practically in their families and in their lives for your entire history. So if you want something new, she was not going to be the one you were going to pick. And I don't think it was because of her age, and probably not even because of her gender. I just, think she just got picked up in a bad point in history.
Hi, thank you very much for this incredible conversation. And Phyllis, my love, thank you for bringing this to us. My question really comes from my own personal experience. I mean, I'm a woman, obviously. I'm in my 60s. That's probably obvious too, although I have a good hairdresser. But my question is really the expectations that have been placed on me as a woman coming of age in the 70s and 80s and 90s, and also as the daughter of a Hunter alum. There was never a question of, was I going to work? It was really, what was I going to do? But that didn't diminish the household responsibilities. So I'm wondering, really, if you have any insights on what we can do. I mean, I was lucky. I had the opportunity to hire somebody to be in my home with my children. I didn't have any daycare options available. What can we do to help women get out of that conundrum of having to be all things to all people all the time?
Thank you. And you give me a chance to say one of the things that if I've got any thoughts that I've taken away from all this stuff that I've done over the years. One of them is that after World War II, and everything that changed after World War II. After World War II, you had a period in America of such enormous economic growth that for the first time ever, probably any place, average, normal, run-of-the-mill people expected that they should be able to have a house, send their kids to college if they wanted to go, take vacations, have a real middle-class lifestyle. And that had never happened before. But all of those people coming in after World War II, all those young couples after that, everybody after that, lived in that expectation. And then suddenly in the 70s, many of you will remember, everything fell apart. You had inflation, you had a recession, people were losing their jobs, everything was a mess. And suddenly, for the first time, families looked out and realized that they could not support the lifestyles that they wanted to continue being accustomed to on one salary. And that was the transformative moment. Once you have girls in high school who are sitting there thinking just automatically, not only who am I going to marry, but what will I do when I get married to take care of things? That to me, one really, really quick story, and then I will stop. This is my favorite subject in the entire world. But when I was doing another book, I was in Connecticut, and I was, for some reason, in New Britain at a community college. And for some reason, this is back some years, I was talking to an entire classroom full of boys about women's history. But they were lovely, so I don't know how I got there, but they were really nice. And we were chatting, and I asked them what their ideal for a wife was, what were their ideal qualities. And they were way too polite to say I wanted to be really hot and attractive. So they all said, oh, personality, we wanted to have a really good personality, they have a sense of humor. And then one of the boys in the back said, and be a good earner. And they all said, yes, very, very important. We want our wives to be good earners. And I thought, wow, this is a whole new arc of history that has come upon us. And it's not easy. It's very difficult. And in most middle-class households that I see now, men having come into marriages realizing their wives are going to have to work too in order to keep everything going, are much more open to the whole question of what you're supposed to do and the sharing of responsibilities. The scary thing moving forward to me is that there are so many women now having children who aren't married, who don't have a second person to rely upon when it comes to childcare. And that is the great cosmic question of the future. It's not lazy husbands. The husbands are fine. It's no husband. And then what do you do? What happens then to all the kids? And it's partly then you move on to the glories, which I know everybody talks about 102, of early childhood education and the critical importance of having universal, high-quality early childhood education, which is one of the very few issues in politics that there's really not much political divide on. I mean, crazy right-wing people don't like it, but normal Republicans are very enthusiastic about early childhood education because it fits into their whole vision of what's going to happen. So yeah, I'm sorry, I've babbled on too much.
Yes, on my story was
Yes.
that my mother-in-law. I'm sure I can be heard. Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say the PS on my story is that my mother-in-law had no concept that I would be going to work after having children. And she called me and she said, I have to apologize that my son doesn't earn enough money for you to stay home. And I was like, this is my choice. I would lose my mind if I stayed home. So,
But you were at the first era where you were allowed to say that, really.
Exactly. So I was blessed. I got
That's
away
why
with
this
saying
is such an amazing time. If you think about it, what we were born into, and then what's happened now, the total transformation of the role of gender in society was one way. It was one way when we were born, when I was born, and it's totally transformed. It's one of the biggest moments in the history of life, in the history of relationships, in the history of civilization, and we got to see it happen, and that just knocks me up.
Thank you very much. I'm really looking forward to reading your book.
Thank you.
I was particularly impressed to see some of the African-American women that you covered in the book. So did you see any particular distinctions in the path that they followed to develop into the leaders that they were that it made you interested in writing about them?
Well, they were always interesting to write about. I mean, Sojourner Truth just knocked my socks off. But the difference in the path was that African-American women were working and married way before it was common for not that that they liked it. The black press, of the 50s, 60s, and even 70s, which was all run by men at the time, was very dismissive of the idea that it was a good idea for wives not to stay home and take care of the house. And that was clearly the way you were supposed to go. Everybody was supposed to do that. And that changed for everybody at about the same time. However, because of the economics of a segregated society, black women who were able to get jobs as domestics and other stuff like that, supportive services, were often able to get jobs when men couldn't. So that the division, although the ideal division was the same, the practical division, day-to-day life, was a much longer tradition of women working because they both needed to and often wanted to. But so the arc was different. But it's interesting that some of this, how many things that, I always presumed that, for instance, before the Civil War, that the black community was very supportive of the idea of women going out, and making speeches. And the guys did not like that at all. They were very uncomfortable with the idea of women, going around and giving speeches. They thought guys should do that, and that's all there was to it. So there's parallels and parallels, but sometimes these breaches, these different tracks. We're being taped. We have to do this.
I was pleased to hear that you're bullish on feminism under the current presidency, because I have to admit, I don't really feel that way a lot.
That's okay, I understand.
I'm wondering why you think things are so different in the Scandinavian countries, how they've fostered such egalitarianism in their societies.
Yeah, and different versions of that I get asked a lot, and I'm always embarrassed that I don't know more about what the role of women as they age and the role of women in general in other societies is. But the Scandinavian countries are different in 900 billion ways as far as their attitude toward life and attitude toward everything. So I think the male-female thing is just part of that entire different life's attitude. But I never thought of, for instance, Britain as being particularly far ahead of us when it comes to women's rights and women's issues, but they've had a woman prime minister. So stuff moves at different, periods in different places. And I can't give you one cosmic answer because it just depends on where you are.
So I wanted to ask, you suggested earlier that maybe you think Joe Biden might be the presumptive nominee of a Democratic Party. But he's had, his blunders as far as women's rights are concerned with Anita Hill, opposition to the repeal of the Hyde Amendment, and some LGBT issues, not being for gay marriage, which is a women's issue as well. Does it concern you at all that Joe Biden might be against Donald Trump, who, both one probably way more than the other, has some issues with women's rights, and what do you think that means for the women's rights movement going forward?
That's a very good point. And certainly Joe Biden has a very mixed history when it comes to a lot of issues that we care about. But, when it's going to be him against Donald Trump, I don't think a whole lot of people are going to have a lot of trouble figuring out which way they want to go on things, since it's just, Joe Biden he's changed in a lot of ways, obviously. He talks about it all the time. And he's kind of good at that. There was one time, it wasn't that long ago, it was just a year or two ago maybe, he did a thing with some college students, and he was being Joe Biden. He's talking about, Donald Trump and how terrible Donald Trump was and all the, grabbing women, all this other stuff. And he said, if I was your age and he was your age, I would just take him behind the barn and I would beat the hell out of him, that, rah, rah, rah. And he's going on about beating up Donald Trump. And I wrote a thing saying, well, I understand your feelings, but it's probably not a good idea to talk about assaulting the President of the United States, even if it's Donald Trump. And then I did it and I went home. And then the next morning, I got a call from Biden's office saying he wanted to speak to me immediately. And I thought, oh my God in heaven, this is going to be bad. And he said, I want to thank you, Gail, I just wanted to thank you for showing me what a jerk I was. And I thought, well, God, you can't really hate a guy like that. I mean, Jesus. So, you know, I think he's come along on all of those things, but you have absolutely right that he's got a very, as far as gender issues concerned, a very mixed history going back. Well, it's partly because he goes back so long, you know, but yeah, I think he's come around anyway. She's coming down the other way.
Hi. I want to start by saying that both of your hair looks just terrific.
Thank you.
And then to be oppositional on the subject of hair dye in the following way. Sometimes people talk about working while older, and then people are surprised by how old you are. And in some ways, dyeing your hair is like being in the closet about your age. And letting your hair be gray is a little like coming out about your age. And so my question is, what's your prescription for minimizing age discrimination if we're doing the natural vain thing of covering our gray and plumping our wrinkles, all of which I support fully, though I don't practice. And so I'm asking you a serious question about age discrimination. And
I really like your hair too, by the way. It looks really, really nice. And you're right. And there are, in an ideal world, you know, nobody would care what color their hair was. Nobody would care, you know, anything about appearance. We would rise above that into a better way of living. Of all the things that I worry about age discrimination and women aging and what's going to happen, the fact that women like to dye their hair is not high on my list at all. But it's true. And one of the reasons that women do it, especially if they're working, is that they want to continue to look as if they're right up there. And that's absolutely true. But on the other hand, I keep wondering sometimes if there aren't a lot of guys who are working where I'm working who wish they could get away with it too, so that they would look younger when they're, because there's a discrimination factor for all people as they get older. You know, that people don't want to promote you again and again and again. So it's, I think, a larger question than the vanity question, but I cannot deny that that vanity thing is in there. It absolutely is. And thank you for bringing it up. You're absolutely right.
I write off my hair dyes on my taxes. And I will just say, I mean, you know, IRS can come after me, but there's study after study about age discrimination. And so I always thought it would make a great story if the IRS came after me, because I would go to town trying to prove it.
Oh, let's hope they're listening tonight, because that would make such a great column.
It's all about the columns. So.
It's all about the columns when you get right down to it.
So I would like to take the final question prerogative. Gail, tell us a little about your reflections on Eleanor Roosevelt, since we are in her home. I mean, this woman was extraordinary. She was the president's eyes and ears, but then she recreated herself as her own leader in her work in human rights. We study here. So how did this drive come, and what do you make of it?
Well, and thanks. She's, you know, the most amazing story that we have, really, as far as women go, I think. And it was partly, she was liberated in a way, I think, by not being more attractive when she was younger. So there were a lot of issues about that weren't as much of a big deal for her, perhaps because she couldn't make them a big deal. I mean, she sort of resigned herself very early on to the fact that she was not going to be glamorous. That was not going to be one of the things that happened. And the second important thing besides, and we're weaving in the fact that she was just an extraordinary character with an enormous, enormous will and an enormous vision and everything else, but the fact that her husband got sick and couldn't do a bunch of things that the normal husband would do, opened all that stuff up to her. And she liked it more than he did. I mean, a lot of the organizing and the going around and the doing the political stuff. But I think if he had been a guy who never got polio, her life might have been very different, just because she was able to take that moment and not just take care of things as, you know, any strong woman does, but just turn it into something humongous and different and extraordinary. So it was, to me, a combination of the stuff that was dealt her and her extraordinary ability to turn that into something else. And her extraordinary ability, I think, out of the feelings that she sometimes had about being looked down on for not being attractive, for being, you know, that somehow that expanded her understanding of everybody else out there who was, for one reason or another, not on the top block, not the people who were running the show. And just her ability to just feel for everybody, which was just unprecedented at that time. That's my best answer to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it's true, and I think it's as interesting. We're about to invite everyone to a beautiful toast to Phyllis upstairs, and you'll notice in the parlor room we'll be in, which was half Eleanor and Franklin's home and half Sarah Roosevelt, the mother-in-law, which is probably another story for
That's
another
another
book.
story entirely, the mother-in-law.
And people say that in some ways it's interesting because Sarah does get short shrift often as the mother-in-law joke, but she was quite a leader herself and a leader particularly for African-American women's empowerment. But we hung the portraits of them across from each other so they could have a conversation when we're not here. But you will note it's one of the most beautiful portraits of Eleanor Roosevelt. She actually looks quite attractive, so it's an interesting dynamic. So we invite you all. I just want to give a shout out to, we're talking about extraordinary women, Fran Barrett from the governor's office, who does so much for us there and is a big friend. And Phyllis, we look forward to saying a wonderful thank you. I have to put Nora Ephron's mother went to Hunter. I want to and which is why, of course, she was so smart and brilliant. So there you have it. Phyllis, Gail, Jessica, this is an extraordinary conversation, inspiring. I think we all also are very optimistic from your optimism about where we are, and certainly talk about optimism. What an impact! What a life Phyllis Kossoff has had, her family here with great love, one of her great achievements in addition to all she's done to impact this world. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Phyllis Kossoff.